Hi, Ashley. Welcome to the Health Trip Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm really excited to have you here today because we are talking about fiber today. And it is a pretty, it seems like a basic topic, but it's actually really not. And it's really hard for people to get in fiber. But before we dive into all the nuances of fiber, I know one of your main focuses is really helping people personalize their nutrition plan. And I think that's a really great place to start out with this podcast because I'm in menopause. I'm actually post-menopause. You're probably around the same age as me. And women are really struggling right now with
Mhm.
weight gain, hot flashes, cognition issues, like you name it, there's issues going on. And
Yeah.
we want a definitive plan. And part of that definitive plan is what do we eat? So why is personalizing this nutrition plan so intriguing to you?
Yeah. Well, because nothing else works. So that I'll start there.
Yeah.
My career started because nothing worked for me, and I was trying everything from a food standpoint, and it really ultimately took, and this is in youth and into my early 20s, but it took just some really bad choices, like trying a lot of things that didn't work for me, and to finally ultimately meet someone who was like, it actually has nothing to do with the food that you're ingesting. Your digestive system doesn't work properly. Like I actually needed to heal it and work through that process. So without something being personalized, it literally is not going to work for your body today. And sometimes we even think things are working because maybe they give us one goal. Wait, they meet one goal, like, oh, I'm actually losing weight, or I'm making muscle, or my headaches are gone, or something. Oh, that must be working for me. But unless we look at all the signals, we aren't necessarily going to see, is it actually fully working for you? I.e., is it helping address what your body needs now and also paying it forward to support what your body will need in the future? That's really important. And then the second part of it is, the reason for personalization is because we are, even though we're women, like as a group, yay, but like we're individuals, and the
Yeah.
same thing does not work for us. I like to say, for me personally, the same thing doesn't work day in and day out, but it definitely doesn't work year in and year out. I turned 50 this fall, and I was like, okay, like I actually need a whole new game plan. Like it literally is. And so for me, it's the perimenopause place, right? So I still totally get a regular period. But all these other things are changing. And so there's kind of like I'm in this like purgatory space where I see so many of my clients where there's actually no sec recommendation. Like I'm not in a place yet where my hormones have shifted enough that I need hormone therapy. I'm like so excited for it. People have been scared,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. I'm not postmenopausal where actually everything is stabilized. My friends that are postmenopausal are like, oh, this is great. Like, I might be minus certain things, but I'm stabilized. I know where I am. And so every day I kind of wake up and I'm like, oh, body, what are you going to show me today? So I think it's so important for us to personalize this for success, but also the way that we actually define success is giving our body what it needs to run better. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like what you said about there are days where it might look different. Forget the year,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm 56 and I still experience that, and
Mhm.
it's the art of becoming an intuitive eater is also,
Mhm.
something I would love to dive deep in, maybe in another episode,
Mhm.
but really understanding how to connect the dots between what you need that day and what
Mhm.
your goals are that day beyond what are just your goals for that year.
Yeah.
But that being said, do you think there's any common denominators in terms of nutrition for midlife women? And what
Yeah.
are those?
Yeah, well, so one of the things that we want to be thinking about is, the common denominator is making sure that our body doesn't have to choose what it's going to work on. I think that's a really important one. So in that space, we need to meet our nutrient needs. Now, and we need to meet them at optimal levels. So labs and RDAs, that we see on nutrition labels and dietary guidelines are really based on avoiding sickness or alerting us to sickness. So that's not helpful. That's
Yeah.
not a space where it says, oh, I have enough iron in my body to do this, 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 and this, right? Instead of saying like, oh, it's Tuesday in February, and I happen to have with the amount of iron that I have, I'll do this so that I can make it through to March. It's like if you don't have like money and you're trying like cash flow and all these other places, it's like, it's kind of how you're navigating your budget. And so, to me, one of the common denominators is we really do need to make sure that we're meeting those optimal levels. So it's personalized in the sense of we might not all have insufficiencies or even deficiencies of the same nutrients, but we need to meet that. Even before I focus on that, we need to recognize the interrelationship between digestion and our hormones. Like that is so critically important. Some of our hormones, as we've come to now learn, are actually made in the lining of our digestive tract. So if there's insult or injury there, we'll talk about this more as it relates to fibers and it relates to short chain fatty acids. If things are not working there, really important things, including hormones that signal appetite, insulin, blood sugar response, metabolic, cognitive function, how we, some of our emotions and mental health around our food choices, that doesn't get turned on, or it doesn't get turned on successfully. So our digestive health is so important. And when hormones shift, they throw our digestion off course. And when our digestion is not working optimally, we can't actually absorb the nutrients that support the optimal functioning of our hormones. So it's this very vicious cycle. So we need to know where we are in that cycle and be able to, to address it on that part. So for all women, it's really important that and I actually think it's part of why we were designed with our menstrual cycle. Of course, we were designed with a fertility concept and the idea of we're here for, for procreation, but we're here for so much more than procreation. So when I think about our design today, I think, part of this is over the course of 28 or 38 days for most women throughout a good part of our lives, we are experiencing changes in our digestive function as a result of our hormone function, right? And so it starts to teach us a correlation to symptoms, like whether it's bloating, whether it's gas, whether it's constipation, for us to look for. I find actually when I talk to men that it's really difficult for them to actually connect those dots and as a result do what's better for themselves, from a health standpoint. They often don't even notice that they have digestive issues. They're like, oh no, I'm fine.
Right.
It's like, no, we have things we have to work on. So for women, I think we really have to, when we look at the commonalities, it's making sure that you've got that optimal digestive function, and hydration ties in with digestion hand in hand. And then the final one that I'll say is that literally for all women, we cannot use sleep as a catch-up concept, like not ketchup as in ketchup, mustard, but like catching up. We can't think about it as, oh, I know I didn't get enough today. I'll do it later, or I'll take a nap, or, oh, the weekend is coming. Because so much of our really important hormonal work is also happening during our sleep. And if our digestion is not better, then it's negatively impacting our sleep. And it becomes this, whole cycle that relates to our mood and our hormones, and all of those pieces. So there are a lot of, I guess, like the commonalities are, as women, we know we have to look in these same places, but what we need to do is become good at assessing the signals. And that's a good bit of what I do in my work at the Better Nutrition Program, is that we invite people to and make sure that they're sharing with us, like, what are those signals that your body is giving you? If you bite into an apple and it's not sweet, it doesn't register on a scale of 1 to 10, a 7 or greater, we're getting a signal that your sweet taste buds are not, they're not at a good operating level. And that can mean a lot of things, right? And that tells us stuff. Or if you drink 8 to 10 ounces of water and you have to pee sooner than 2 hours, that's actually a good signal that our body is telling us something. Or if and we go through those experiments, we look at those signals in addition to things like labs and, other testing. And we basically can look at you and who you are and say, okay, with these things that are common, we know we need these things to be, for optimal health. How are you performing against that? And that helps us figure out where to prioritize an intervention for you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. From a health coach perspective, one of the things that we do is help our clients start tracking or journaling all of these connections so that if they are working with a healthcare provider, they have these notes. They can start to see patterns of what's going on where maybe they didn't even see those before. And so when I'm first working with someone on their gut health, I don't want them to change anything. I want
Hmm.
them to keep everything the same and just start becoming more aware, write them down. And then you start to like see these things creeping in, like, oh, okay, this connects with this. And so I really love that reminder of you can't just, go in and fix it. You have to start
Right.
with understanding where the root cause is, where are those connections. And that's a great segue into dietary fiber because we all need dietary fiber. However, as you just stated, everybody's different. And for some women, especially in the menopausal transition, we know in perimenopause, our gut health changes, right? So we know the microbes change. And then we know that for some women, eating too much dietary fiber or certain types of dietary fiber really causes a lot of pain, gas, bloating, chronic constipation, diarrhea, possibly acid reflux. There could be things that are going on where other people do really well.
Mhm.
And so let's just dive into dietary fiber. What is dietary fiber?
Yeah. Oh, I love this one. Before I became a dietitian, I was selling sugared cereals to America and telling them they were good for you. But I was working for Kellogg's as my client, and Kellogg's was, it was like this beacon, this original awakening of like fiber, fiber, fiber. He's like infamously famous for sort of trying to get more of that in. And boy, we went in like a totally different direction. And if you look at our, part of the reason paleo is so popular and just even our like origin story, what was available for us to eat most of the time was fiber. You couldn't help but get in fiber. You were lucky and probably had to be intentional about getting in fats and getting in protein and other things. It was like fiber was, what was the foundation. And we've really like inverted that, and we've extracted fiber for so many different reasons, for convenience reasons, as well as for taste preferences, et cetera. And fiber plays this really important role in so many different plants from a nature standpoint. And then when it comes into our body, it does a variety of different things. So one of the most important things is to not lump all fiber together. So the skin of an apple is going to do something different than the flesh of an avocado, which is going to do something different or provide different types of fiber than what's in a bean, which is also going to be different than what we find in a whole grain, right? So we want to, when we look at that part, we want to recognize that if nature presented all of these things in things that we are intended to be eating, then it's there for us to get it in from a variety standpoint. And I even forgot ones like green banana or oats or leeks, and things. So when we talk about, prebiotic fibers, so fibers go into the body and they do a variety of different things. They might be an intestinal scrub brush. So think of the brush that you scrub your toilet with, and fiber may go in and do that exact throughout that entire football field length and plus of your digestive tract to make sure. And when it's brushing, it's not just brushing to pull waste along and make sure that, waste gets moved along through the pathway and gets eliminated, but it's also cleaning when it's brushing. When you see animals like sort of like licking themselves to clean, and that kind of thing, it's like, yeah, we need, what fiber is doing is it's turning over cells in that mucosal layer, and it's helping us, on that part. Fiber also, in collaboration with water, acts like a snowball, and it goes in and it balls up and it goes through and it creates a bolus, and it's grabbing stuff as it goes along. So it's pulling that waste product out. But in combining with water and expanding, if you've ever had like a chia pudding or just seen chia seeds in water, it's a good way to visualize it. That expansion in your belly actually helps you to, and especially from a stomach standpoint, is going to help you to feel full. So the reason that it helps us to feel full, we used to think it was just that when it expanded in the stomach, that it starts to signal when the stomach it senses that expansion, sensors are, pick up and it says, oh, I'm going to be full. But what we've also noted and learned is that that happens in the small intestine too. So it's really important that we're not just focusing on that happening, in the stomach, on that part. So it's going to play an important role there. Fiber is going to to be part of feeding good bacteria. So one of the distinctions there is that bad bacteria, the less good, I'll just call it bad, like unhelpful bacteria, is going to feed off of sugar, whereas the good for you, the variety, all these commensals, these different probiotics, if you will, they feed off of different fibers. And in that process, as they eat it, they actually make what we call a postbiotic. So you've got your probiotics eating your prebiotics and making your postbiotics. And that process is its own gassiness, its own fermentation, and it creates these short chain fatty acids. So that's going to be really important for us. And there are in that process other things like transformation of vitamin K or availability of vitamin D, or just, other things are occurring. So that's like even just kind of scratching the surface. When I was talking about the ball of fiber, the snowball going through, when in the absence of fiber, like the tone of your digestive tract lining is really important so that it moves. It's a motility, so it's a muscle that needs to move. And when that tone is not like anything, when it's not exercised, and it's not having things move along, it can create, it sort of relaxes like quitters, socks that sort of the elasticity loses and they go down. And for us, when that occurs, you can also develop pockets. And some people genetically also, or their design is that they may have more of those pockets. Those are called diverticula. And so you have people that have diverticulosis where there's those pockets. And we see that happening more often in people who have had insufficient fiber. So we see it in a lot of individuals who, especially, it was kind of a disease of more of the processed food, more of the TV dinner, and the reduction of fiber that occurred in, people who were born in, I'd say that like 1930s, 1940s on, into really, I would say the 2000s when we started to bring back fiber, but maybe a little bit before in terms of, paying attention to it. So there are tons of reasons, for us to focus on fiber, as well as many varieties of fiber. And that's one of the reasons that the oversimplification of just getting these grams of fiber can be a poor quality recommendation, as we start off the conversation in terms of personalization, as well as, to your point, how somebody tolerates it or what their body actually needs, is going to be really important as well.
Yeah. So I just want to summarize what you've just said, a little bit of it. You've basically described the three types of fiber, right? Insoluble, soluble, and then the prebiotic fiber. And so the soluble fiber is the one that collects the water and moves through and has a lot to do with the motion. And then the insoluble is all fiber undigested?
What the soluble has some digestibility to it, but yeah, it's sometimes hard for people with it's a harder conversation with the digestibility, but insoluble and prebiotic, it's very easy to say not digested. Yeah.
Okay. So the insoluble is the one that adds more bulk to our poops, and the
And the scrub brush. Yeah.
and the scrub brush, right? And then the prebiotics are what you're talking about. Those are the types of fiber we eat that are feeding the good bacteria in our gut microbiome. What is the easiest way for people to remember? Because you're talking about getting, if available to that person, getting in a variety, because they all do different things, right?
Yeah.
What is the easiest way for people to remember which is which
Yeah.
fiber
Yeah.
goes into which class, and do some overlap?
So it's a really good question, absolutely, on the overlap. So that's the place that I want to start with, especially with insoluble and soluble. But even before we get there, I think one of the really important pieces of this is to recognize that everything I just said is plants. So on that standpoint, if there is a reason that you cannot consume or you choose not to consume a category of plants, then that is going to have you be more challenged with your fiber consumption. So that's an important place to look. Like if there are reasons that you don't get in grains, or reasons that you're not getting in fruits and vegetables, or these like other things that, that we were mentioning before, I think that's going to be key. And then the other part, just like we get into the conversation where you're like, oh, walnut is great for omega-3s and avocado is so good for omega-9. And you're like, no, these foods exist in nature with some of a variety, right? So you don't tend to have in nature an insoluble fiber food or a soluble fiber food alone. You have things that have higher or lower amounts of the different ones, right? Same with amino acid, same, you know,
Mhm.
et cetera. So probably the one that we would need to be more intentional about is prebiotic fiber. And it's also one that people often have either preferences against or are choosing not to consume or may have difficulty with getting it in. And especially a couple of them that have been more moved into processed and used as ingredients in packaged food. So we'll come back to that in a second. When we look at soluble and insoluble, so if we want to make it easy on us, one of the starting place for, I think, everyone that can be beneficial is it's really smart to spend a week figuring out how much fiber you're actually getting in most days, right? So we have this easy fiber evaluation, and you go through and you fill out and you just say like, hey, what are the things that I'm getting in? There are other trackers and, you know, ways that you can do that. And just at that point, just count whatever, you know, if something on a label says that it's fiber, you go in and you just count. And that's going to give us some insights about our total fiber intake. And then what we can do is we can look also at the quality of the fiber. So yes, I might be in some instances counting that I'm eating a product that is processed. It's not a whole plant, but it's actually crackers and it has a fiber added back to it, right? Instead of on that part. So there might be a quality conversation. Our coaches, you know, I love working with having our coaches work on this part and say, hey, are there ways that you could increase your fiber intake by adjusting the quality of the food you're consuming and not necessarily getting it from a package standpoint? That could be valuable. So the first place we could look at is, okay, how much am I getting in? And if I'm not getting in enough for my body's needs, then what are better ways for me to increase the overall quantity of it, right? Now, when you get into the diversity of it, insoluble versus soluble versus prebiotic fiber, then in that space, that's often driven by what your health goals are and saying, hey, if I'm not getting in, you know, so what I would say is if somebody's getting in a good amount of fiber, say they're getting in 30 grams, maybe it's 30, 35 grams, that's doing a great job with their fiber intake. I very rarely see somebody that isn't getting in a nice percentage of soluble and insoluble fiber. It's very rare that I would see that just coming, say, just from insoluble fiber. It would actually be pretty difficult. Where I may see a deficit is in the prebiotic fiber. And that's just something that we would then look at, you know, in terms of those food choices. If somebody's low in fiber, they're usually not getting in enough insoluble and soluble as well as prebiotic. And so I think to me, the easiest thing to do to start with and to focus on if we're really trying to make this simple is how do we increase our intake? And there are probably three ways that we can look at increasing our intake. When you consume foods that are closer to the form in nature, so when you eat your fruits and vegetables with their skins, so if I'm having a sweet potato and I eat the skin, if I'm having an apple and I have the skin, if I'm eating beans and I'm actually eating the whole beans as opposed to like a bean puff, you know, or something that's been extruded and puffed open, if I'm having a whole grain and it's not a white flour, you know, if I'm making those choices, then I'm more likely to be getting in then I'm going to be getting in more fiber from it and more of that variety. And then the prebiotic fibers, as I said, we probably need to be more intentional with them. But that's also important to note because those can be ones that are that also have more challenge to the individual digestive tract. So if somebody's already having a digestive issue, you know, I will work on those specifically. And we can talk about those separately in a moment. I just wanted to pause there because I know you're looking for simple, and simple to me is really that, you know, coming in and saying, let's start with meeting my fiber needs from food. And I might also add a supplement, but let's start off with it, you know, really from that better quality food side.
Yeah. So if 30, 35 grams is the goal for the day for most people, but we're talking about women in midlife, what could a meal look like? Like, is it sort of like protein where, let's say your goal is 100 grams of protein and you break it down into 3 or 4 meals? Is
Mhm.
that what we should be doing with fiber
Yes.
as well?
Yeah. So fiber also plays a really important role when we're talking about all the different things that it does. And this is soluble and insoluble, and even your prebiotic fibers. They're going to slow how quickly carbohydrates are being absorbed into the blood and as a result impacting blood sugar. So, and they're also going to help us feel full. So we do not want to pack a ton of fiber at one time for digestive bloating and discomfort, but we also don't want to just be like, oh, at breakfast I had 25 grams of fiber, and then at lunch I had, 5 grams, and then the rest of the day I didn't, because we're very likely then to see that negatively play out in terms of how much we consume, and also how our blood sugar, is impacted later in the day. There might be times where we consume less fiber in the evening because we're trying to ease our digestive system, or we're trying to have a lower amount of carbohydrate because our body doesn't need as much energy before going to bed. So there could be a lesser amount, but I still like to see us have, for most people, it's around 3 to 5, like 3 would be the lowest, but 5 grams to cover off, of fiber to cover off what you're having at that meal or snack. So it's really smart to space it throughout the day, and also to pair it with water so that you're making sure that you're able to have the fiber do all of its jobs, when you're
Yeah.
consuming. And that's really smart, because a lot of times when people actually talk about or complain, in an appropriate way, that the fiber is problematic for their system, they often are getting too much at one time, or they're underhydrated in their consumption, along with their consumption with fiber. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so many of the women that I work with are not hydrating enough.
Mm,
That's a big problem. And I think a lot of that is connected to more frequent urination, right?
yeah.
More urinary issue changes along with the menopausal transition.
Oh, with parent. And that's super important, because remember, hydration is not about getting water in. You don't like say, oh, I drank water, I'm hydrated. Water needs to be escorted into the cells, and the water needs to meet the fiber, et cetera. And it does that with minerals. And so if you're another reason to avoid food that is hyper processed is the minerals are lost, or even water, when water is filtered, we lose minerals that are there. And when we lose those minerals, they will negatively impact hydration, which is the act of actually bringing water into the cells, so that the cells get the water and the nutrients, on that part. And in doing that with hydration, at least one of those nutrients is magnesium, which is going to support motility, which
Yep.
is really important for moving the fiber along through the system. So one of the reasons people often women are experiencing issues with their fiber intake, and are concerned and saying it just makes me feel uncomfortably full, or I'm constipated, or it gives me reflux, or any of this, is we're insufficient and frankly deficient in magnesium, depending on where somebody is on the spectrum. And that, as a result, their body isn't moving enough. That motility, the digestive tract is not moving, and so the fiber feels stuck there. So if you're increasing your fiber, but you're not getting in enough of that magnesium, which is part of hydration as well. So it's really this full circle,
Yeah.
approach on that piece, for
Yeah.
sure.
Before we move on to short chain fatty acids, I had one more thought while you were talking,
Yeah.
and that was that women in midlife often gain weight around their midsection,
Mhm.
and that leads them to make, some pretty strange nutrition choices, right? Some people just stop eating enough food and they're drastically under eating in their calories, while other people might go very, very low carb, and they might
Mhm.
take out all the starchy carbs. And I was wondering, from your perspective, what your thoughts are on when women, for some women that really works. They'll eat
Mhm.
a ton of non-starchy fruits and vegetables, everything above ground. But what happens if they eliminate those below ground carbohydrates in terms of their fiber intake?
Yeah. And that, I think, goes to the start of the conversation when we said working, or how we define success. So if you define success of losing that belly weight, that may be a part of what is working. But if it compromises your microbiome, that's compromising your mood, your hormones, and your cognitive function, as well as your heart health, for decades to come, right? So we can't, or even your risk of cancer, or, because of how, we clearing used hormones, and things like that. So we need to be careful of stating a goal or a success of a way of having like a dietary approach, and saying, oh, it's working. Wonderful. If we figure out what's working. So if you for a period of time, or for a decade or longer, do really well with, more of what I'll call a keto-ish, like a more high fat, medium amount of protein and lower carb, then we have to knock it out of the park with your non-carbohydrate fiber intake. So, we look at things like hemp seeds and sunflower, like we can look at seeds in that part and get stuff in. We can look at, we probably need a fiber supplement, and to look at that. And you have to be careful with a fiber supplement, because if you take it when you're taking in nutrients, like with a multivitamin, you can interfere with the absorption of
Yeah.
nutrients. So there's just a strategy to it, right? So it's not for me to say that any type of eating is right or wrong. What I will say, and what is, professionally responsible, is to say, when we look at what is working, again, my definition is that it's working today, but it's not borrowing against your future health. It's not compromising something. So it's not weight loss, it's weight health. And I want to make sure that your health is, we're still laying the foundation for your health. And sometimes also we need to do certain things to shock the system, to like kind of, I'll
Yeah.
say, like, it's like, you put the shocks on and get it going again. And then it's like, oh, okay, now I remember how to do this.
Hmm.
And some of that is the result, as I'm sure you've seen too, Jill, of making up for things that people did earlier in life. So I was just working with a patient who had very disordered eating in her youth, and we're now in her 50s really seeing the ramifications of that, because certain things that we want the body to do, it just will not do. It was like, you know what, you didn't support your bones when you were young. You didn't, like, you didn't do like this from a building standpoint. You didn't do this. And the conversation I have with her is, okay, like, that's okay. Like, there is zero reason that those were your choices then. But we know what we're working with. So now we're going to do different things for you than I might do for somebody else. And that is where your nutrition really is like a prescription, and you shouldn't be borrowing a prescription from somebody else and thinking
Yeah.
like, oh, this should work for me the same way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So important. All right, let's get to short chain fatty acids. Why are these so fascinating?
Yeah.
What's the big deal about them, and why are they important to midlife women?
Yeah. So important for everyone, but boy, they're pronounced in their importance, because I think, because what we started the conversation off with is that your digestion not only is your foundation of your health, like you can never have good health without good digestion on that part. And when we're looking at hormone shifting throws digestion off course. And the solution, the solve for helping our hormones that are shifting, is actually getting our digestion back on course, right? So it's so important in that space. With short chain fatty acids, one of the things that we've identified is that this relationship, for a while we were just like, eating fiber, good for you. Oh, there are these new things called probiotics. Probiotics are important to get into the body. Lactobacilli, bifidobacteria was like the discovery of that for me was like, oh, this is just, a game changer. It's like suddenly a quarterback came into the game and actually knows what they're doing, right? And it was like, oh, we can have all these results. And so it's like lactobacilli, bifidobacteria, like we have Akkermansia, we have Clostridiums, we have all of these different things, and they need food. And so what we start to learn over time is that if you just have probiotics, it's not going to work. Your probiotics need to have their food, their desired food. You also need the lining of your digestive tract to be robust. So you need things like glutamine, and we need to be able to support that. And so when they go through that process of eating, so if a type of probiotic gets the type of food that it likes, it eats it, and the byproduct of that fermentation, going through the fermentation process, is the short chain fatty acid. And there are these varieties, right? So butyrate is one that we hear a lot about, and we should hear a lot about. It's also one that's, I think, getting a lot of attention because it's part of our incretin hormone process. So that's our GLP-1, the important, that particular hormone is very newsworthy, because it's, the synthetic version is Ozempic and these others. And that's so important because your incretin hormones are like the pilot light, or I like to say your switch, and you need to activate your switch to make sure that your insulin and your leptin and your other hormones are able, thyroid, et cetera, are able to do their work. So just that reaction has to happen in the body, and it happens by way of certain critters having what they like to eat and giving that off, right? We have acetate, we have propionate, like these are all important, and then tied to upstream functioning, that occurs in the digestive tract. And it's really interesting because what we basically have identified, for a long time, we've thought about the digestive tract, the most exciting and interesting things happening inside the tube. So your good bacteria is in there, your bad, keeping the bad bacteria in balance, nutrient conversion, things are passing along or whatever. We know there is a whole party, like really important party, that's happening in the mucosal layer, that lining around the digestive tract. And some of those probiotics, like the Akkermansia that I was just mentioning, it is actually going in and it's chewing like a Pac-Man. It's chewing up the mucin there, cleaning things up and moving things over. And this is how that butyrate is being formed. So that's so critical, that the tone I was talking about for the lining of the digestive tract, for your immune system's function, for hormones function, properly. So when we think about all of that, we're thinking, why is that, like, for, I'll call it middle age, but like, who knows if it's going to be middle for long? It might be like, might move into the first third, depending on how long we're
Yeah.
living. But for a lot of women, like kind of any, like in our 40s through our 60s on that piece, a lot of things that happened earlier in our lives, birth control, oral contraceptives, antibiotic medications, maybe steroid medications, maybe hormones for fertility, maybe stress, maybe alcohol, maybe not giving our body what it needed nutritionally. So many of these things have impacted the ability for our bodies to build a robust lining, or have eroded at the robustness of that mucosal layer. So the reason that we need to do this is, number one, to support healthy hormones, and number two, to make sure we're doing that repair work for the longevity of the lining of that digestive tract and how it relates to hormones. So it's really, really an important focal area. Yeah.
So this leads back to prebiotic fibers, because
Mm.
this is the specific type of fiber that you said a lot of people struggle getting into their daily diet, but this is what the probiotics, the good bacteria, want to eat for their food.
Mm-hmm. And there's something fascinating, Jill, and I think we're also just on the cusp of this. So we will say prebiotic fibers, but we also are, when we're also looking at polyphenols. So we're looking at a class, like especially in our fruits. So we hear things like cranberry or pomegranate, these kinds of things. And one of the reasons is, a cranberry has a skin, right? Or a pomegranate, there's a little skin in there. And what we're finding is that there are prebiotic fibers there. They're just, we're just in that space of looking at their impact. So I like to say polyphenols and prebiotic fibers, just to clarify in that part. And the interesting thing about prebiotic fibers is also, we see this in nature. So I'll just give an example, one in nature and one in preparation. So a banana starts off really green, and then it gets real mushy and brown, right? On that part. So in its greenest phase, and when it's before, like in almost what feels undigestible, because it's like even impossible to open, the banana up, in that phase, it is actually really rich in those prebiotic fibers, right? Oats, when they are raw. Now, I'm not talking about powdered like that, but when we mix them, in, say with almond milk or hemp milk or dairy milk or yogurt, or, even just some water, but we don't heat them up. If we don't cook them, if in that raw phase, they're more rich in prebiotic fiber. Well, when you look at cultures, like Scandinavian countries, for years, like their muesli has been prepared in that way, and they weren't doing things where they were making it. And even in parts, in different Asian cuisine, so we look at Japanese, Chinese, etc. There are preparations where they're not heating the grains, they're making congees, and they're not heating things up, right? And so it's grain and water, etc. And this was giving you more of that good bacteria, of the prebiotic fiber, not the good bacteria that feeds the good bacteria. So really important for us to look at that, leeks and chives and onions, and honestly, things that were very ubiquitous in a lot of different cultures and a lot in their cuisines, and just availability, these bulbs, right? Things that grow in the soil and are, going to collect a lot of nutrient that way. Those are going to be those prebiotic fibers. So when we get those in, they're going in, and that's the preferred food. So just like we think about things like, I'll give an example of cows. And when cows eat grass, when we talk about them being grass fed, that's better for their digestion, because the grass is better, that it gives their body, and probably the stuff around the grass that they're taking in, all the bugs, it gives their digestive system something that's easier on it than, say, when they're given grain. So we say look for grass fed and finished as opposed to grain on that part. When they get what they like better, they're healthier, and their meat and their dairy products are better and better tolerated by us. Same thing when our critters inside of us eat what they desire, when they eat the leeks, when they get the green banana, when they get that, and they spew out, or they ferment, or they produce these short chain fatty acids, we get what our bodies need to say to our hormones, like, all right, go to work, like here you go on that part. So, at the end of the day, overcooking, over processing, and other things that we have done to our food have really reduced the availability of these things. Now, on the flip side, if you go over into the supplement or into the processed food space, we also see total disasters. So we see things that have, like, I've seen kids products that have like 5 or 6 grams of inulin in them. That's a lot of a prebiotic fiber. Like, giving a child a bite or two of a green banana might be an appropriate amount for them digestively, but having them have a refined flour product that then has, with added sugar in it, that then has a higher amount of a prebiotic fiber in there, that is a synthetic version or maybe a food-based version, so that the label can say high in fiber, also potentially, problematic. We see this in bars. I have people all the time that'll say to me, I was eating this bar and it gives me a bellyache, and they think they can't eat chicory or inulin. So they're like, oh, well, I shouldn't get in any prebiotic fibers. And they Google all the sources of prebiotic fibers and don't get them in. No, that's not it. It's that in the way that it's been added to a processed food is not better for you, so
Hmm.
let's step back and see what could be, better tolerated, et cetera.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how much prebiotic fiber should midlife women get a day? How do we know, 5 to 6 grams in a bar doesn't seem like a whole lot.
Right. And that example there was actually from a kid's standpoint. I think that's too, I've seen kid cereals or products
Hmm.
for kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so for women, what I try to do is I look at where you are. So it's the same thing as steps. If you're getting in 100 or 200 steps, I'm not going to come up and be like, I've got a plan for you, 10,000 steps a day. That's your goal.
Hmm.
We're going to look at, hey, if you're getting in 1 or 200 right now, or like if we're at just that amount of steps, or if in the case of, if you're getting in 5 or 6 grams of fiber on average right now, first of all, let's understand why we're not getting in fiber the rest of the day. Like, is it when I eat this, I have this issue? Is it I don't like these foods? Is it I hadn't thought about it? Is it, what is it on that part?
Yep.
And we start. And then we start to look at building your fiber choices throughout the day. And, there are different recommendations that are, I don't think I almost don't know if a percentage of your fiber intake being prebiotic, like what percentage is that I would ascribe to for every woman. I will look at it a little bit differently, but I want to see some. And so a good starting point is if we said, if my goal is 30 grams of fiber and I'm able to get in about 5 to 7 grams of prebiotic fiber, that's probably going to be a really good, like a good amount, for me in that part. For some people, it might be 3 times a week. I want you to add in, we're going to try this source of prebiotic fiber. I've had a lot of luck with overnight oats for people, being able to get that in. Onions are really difficult. Onions, garlic, things like they're difficult, really depends on what's going on for somebody, and taste and, other factors. So we look at that, in that regard for sure.
Yeah, I was that person. I could not eat onions or garlic for 10 years. I just
Mm,
started reintroducing onions, cooked onions only. I can't eat them
okay.
raw
Yeah.
into my diet. And so far, so good. But garlic, I can't even like smell it. It
It's
just,
not. Yeah.
yeah, it really hurts
Yeah.
my stomach. Yeah. So
Mhm.
really interesting, personalizing this approach, tracking, journaling, working with a
Yes.
provider who really understands this is so important. And I want to circle back to the GLP-1 because
Mhm.
that is such a hot topic among midlife women who are really struggling to get that excess weight off. And that weight can accumulate. Maybe year one in perimenopause, it's 3 pounds. And then every year after, it's 1 to 5. And before you know it, people are, 20, 30, and 50 pounds overweight.
Yep.
And so I want you to just sort of take us through how that butyrate really works on that GLP-1 hormone.
Yeah. So our, I think it's really important to understand that we have a series. We actually have a lot of them. It's not even just, I wish like we don't, there's probably, I mean, there's a lot. There's like 20 plus, et cetera, in terms of hormones that impact satiety, so our food choices, whether we feel full, like all of these different pieces, as well as our blood sugar, as well, et cetera, on that
Yeah.
part. And they all get different triggers. The three that I combine for the switch when I'm, talking about how we want to activate our switch within us is GLP-1, whose counterpart, so that's glucagon-like peptide 1, or its counterpart is GIP. And so GIP has more to do with the telling you to be hungry and also to stimulate glucagon to go and say, I need to break this down and get available blood, get available sugar, and bring it into the blood. So GLP-1, CCK, cholecystokinin, PYY, it's your peptide, tyrosine, and they have different stimulants on that part. And so butyrate is a stimulant for the secretion of GLP-1 hormones. So you still need to make
Wait,
sure
and I just want to
yeah,
interrupt real quick. I want to make it really clear to
yeah.
women who might not really understand. Our bodies naturally make GLP-1,
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for
right?
bringing that up. Yeah.
Yes,
So you are making, so if we want to go unpack and Joe, we can make our GLP-1 guide available so that people can come back to
that'd
this
be
and
great.
read it. Yeah. On that part. So GLP-1, so people are like, oh, Ashley, that Ozempic, is it snake oil? And I'm like, no, it's actually a synthetic hormone that is made, but it was based off of the venom of a Gila monster. So if you want to entertain anyone at your, at the dinner table, it was like Ozempic, or Wegovy, or et cetera, it's snake oil. It's not. It's based off of the venom of the Gila monster. So like our bodies, their venom, and in the lining of our digestive tract, we actually make a hormone, but this hormone acts very quickly. It acts like a pilot light. It's a switch. It just switches things on and then it goes away. So our body actually intended it to be degraded for it to go away. So that's really important. The body said, I don't want this sticking around. So what has happened is it is meant to switch this on, and when it switches it on, it activates insulin, that tells which insulin is the hormone that goes and picks up sugar and takes it from the blood into cells. It activates leptin, which is the hormone that says to the body, hey, brain, you've gotten enough, so tell the body to feel full, and now that you're satisfied. And what we're also understanding about this GLP-1 hormone is it hits receptor sites in many different organs, not just in our pancreas, not just in our brain, in our thyroid, in our liver. Like, so we're learning a lot more about it, and probably all of the impact of what it does. So for some people, that messaging is not happening. So could you be somebody who has dysfunctional, you're not producing GLP-1? Could you be somebody who is producing it, but your butyrate, that response is not happening where it's saying, oh, now I want you to secrete it. Like the messaging isn't telling you for it to activate, or it's activating, it's happening so quickly, but your transport systems in the body it's not getting to all those receptor sites. It's at all these places. So just like with a diabetic, if you've got too much sugar in the blood, and even though you're producing a nice amount of insulin, if there's too much, you don't have enough insulin for it, right? And so we have a problem there. So what was identified was, okay, if we don't have enough of this hormone, whether we're not producing enough or we're not secreting it enough, it's not being activated, then what if we could have something that could, where we could inject it, and if we could create something, and this is what they ultimately created for these medications, is at the time of this recording, the shot is one where it doesn't degrade for 7 days. So instead of it going away after 20 or 30 minutes, which is the way the body intended, it sticks around for 7 days. So the analogy I like to give is your body's own hormone production of GLP-1 is like one shot of espresso. Ozempic and these others are like 4 shots of espresso. 4 shots of espresso has a better chance of getting you caffeinated, right? Like really
Yeah.
high on that part, but it's going to stick around for a lot longer. And so
Yeah.
that is what they've created. Now, there's also a natural version. So there's there's a cultivar of hops, and that ingredient works just the way that the GLP-1 hormone works, and just like the medication, it still degrades though. So you take it and it works like the medication, but you have to take it an hour before your meal, and it doesn't stick around. So what we're finding is there are varieties, right? And they may even come out, it sounds like they've come out with I think it's pending FDA approval right now, a version of the shot that would stick around for 6 months in your body. So the big decisions to be made for something that's not meant to stick around, versus stick around long time. So yeah, I think that's a really important one for us to understand, is that even if you're on Ozempic right now today, which many perimenopausal and menopausal women are choosing that route because everything else, like they're recognizing, hey, this part of my hormonal response is not working. Something is not getting to my brain and telling me to stop or to feel satisfied or to calm the food noise. I love this medication for that. Like there's real
Yeah.
value that's there. But we still need to work on your switch. We still need to work on your
Yeah.
butyrate. We still need your fiber intake. We still need the prebiotic fiber and the right probiotics and the right polyphenols. So it just means that if you use that as a tool, you can then work on that while you're using that as a tool. And for others, they may have different tools that they use instead of the medication. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And I really like that you closed it up with, we really need to work on this natural process, no matter what
No
decision we
matter what.
make.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
And that's a
Yeah.
great segue into concluding our episode here. You gave us some amazing information, and I know there's going to be some great golden nuggets takeaways on butyrate and the other short chain fatty acids and fiber, but leave us with your your top 3 recommendations for midlife women struggling to get in enough fiber,
Mhm.
and what are those steps that they can take?
Yeah. So the first one is to know your fiber intake,
Yep.
and to recognize that seasonally your fiber intake will change. So it's a pretty good idea, to take the fiber quiz, like, I don't know, like once a quarter, or if your diet has significantly changed, if something has happened and you've had to eliminate certain things, or, or if you're choosing, to have a
Yep.
different diet. So know your intake. That's number one. The other one is spread your intake out throughout the day, and match that spreading your intake out throughout the day with spreading your water throughout the day, which, by the way, should also help with not having to pee as often, because we don't want to overload with water at one time, and it should help with belly aches because we don't want to overload with fiber in the absence, of water on that part. And then the third one is really to look at food sources and say, where can I make an upgrade to a food choice, so that I am going to get in more of the fiber from food. So a great example for me is, I could buy a bar, like any of us can go out and we can buy a protein bar, that kind of thing. And just like for me, one of the ones, I actually was doing it with my niece, and then I was like kind of embarrassed because I was like, why am I not doing this for myself? Just rolling up some energy balls and using nuts and seeds and adding ground flaxseed in there, and, having it have almond butter, and I throw my protein powder in there, and I mean, they're delicious. They're fun. They're, fun to bite, that kind of thing. So finding ways that are deliciously
Yep.
doable where it's more from food. When you have your sweet potato, keep the skin on. When you eat the apple, keep the skin on. Those kinds of things I think will be better choices for you as
Yeah.
well.
Actually, I have one question that came in from a viewer. She wanted to know, her family uses psyllium husk as a supplement for fiber, and we're not going to have time to dive deep,
Yeah.
but if we were to choose the best types of fiber supplements, is there one, or is this
Yeah.
again personalized?
Great question. Well, remember, you can supplement with food with fiber, like the supplemental side of it. So remember, I just said ground flaxseed. So
Yeah.
ground flaxseed could be, or wheat bran or oat bran, so there are definitely the food side of things, and we can use them in that way. I think psyllium husk is a great source. Oftentimes the way that it typically comes in a format where you're getting in a non-nutritive sweetener. Now, hopefully it's not an artificial sweetener or an artificial color, like, because that would be kind of,
Hmm.
I like to say, like, cleaning your floor with dirty shoes, like not a better
Hmm.
choice. But we have to be careful of daily consumption of non-nutritive sweeteners that can
Yeah.
bump our sweet taste buds up. Now, I will say strategically, I sometimes use that, and that's the one thing in the day where I would be like, because I'll take a fiber supplement with me when I'm traveling, noting I don't take it on travel days because on a plane, adding more fiber, not a good option. But
Totally.
yeah, once I've got my magnesium and once I'm moving, and doing that, but that might be an option. And so in that case, I just recognize, okay, that's where I'm getting in the non-nutritive sweetener. And so if I notice that I'm getting more of my sweet cravings, then I have to like kind of pull back and say, how do I adapt for this? So looking at that, but I think that can be a great choice. It works for some people, other people need a different kind. And
Yeah.
remember, you're getting more of your insoluble fiber there. So it allows you to check some of the fiber box, but it doesn't allow you to check all the fiber
Yeah,
boxes.
great point. Well, thank you so much again for joining us today. And what an amazing amount of information for midlife women to use on their journey. And I will put in the show notes how to contact you. I'll get your GLP-1 guide and your
Perfect.
fiber quiz and all that great stuff. And thanks. And it was great to see you.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.